Jim Parsons was on top of the world. His character Sheldon Cooper was the most important part of The Big Bang Theory, helping it pull 18 million viewers per episode. He was making $1 million every time the cameras rolled, and Forbes literally calls you the highest-paid television actor on the planet. Then Jim was offered a mind-blowing contract of $50 million written on it. All he had to do was just play Sheldon for a few more seasons, but Jim said no. And it's because of this dark reason connected to Big Bang Theory. Summer 2018 was supposed to be routine for Jim Parsons, but it wasn't. What happened during those brutal months between seasons 11 and 12 was a collision of life events so intense, so overwhelming that Parsons himself called it almost cosmic. Everything hit at once, and by the time the dust settled, the longest-running multi-camera sitcom in television history was finished. Let's start with the heartbreak. Jim had 2 dogs with his husband, Todd Spiewak. They'd raised them together since Jim was 31 years old. One of those dogs, which was 14 years old, was dying. During this time, Jim was in New York City, grinding through 8 Broadway shows per week in The Boys and the Band revival. But he wasn't just on Broadway. He'd fly back to Los Angeles whenever filming required it, then return to New York for another week of performances. The schedule was absolutely brutal and his dog's health was deteriorating fast. Had described one walk in the park right before a commercial shoot. The dog looked terrible. Parsons was exhausted, emotionally wrecked, barely holding it together. His husband Todd reminded him they had commitments, that everyone had rearranged their schedules to accommodate him. And Jim just broke down crying because he wasn't there for the dog he had shared 14 years of his life with. But what choice did he have? At this point, Jim was at the peak of his career. He wasn't just a TV star. He was a star, and everyone in Hollywood wanted a slice of his star power. Jim kept juggling work and his commitment to his dog, and he and Todd had to make the heartbreaking decision to euthanize their beloved pet at home the following day. At this point, this looked like an incident Jim would be able to put behind him, but he couldn't. And just as he was dealing with the loss of his dog, something else happened. Days after putting his dog to sleep, Jim was back on stage performing The Boys and the Band, and he fractured his foot badly. Still, he didn't stop the performance and powered through the entire show in severe pain. He went to the hospital afterward and realized something chilling. The human body is fragile and it breaks without warning. This was an actor who needed mobility for his roles, and here he was nursing a potential career-ending injury. Jim felt like he was staring into an abyss. What would have happened if he couldn't get back on stage? What would the producers do? How would he handle failing everyone who depended on him? But he recovered and got back on stage. However, the thoughts of his own fragility still remained and it terrified him. And then the real terror set in. Here is where it gets darker. Jim's father died when he was 52. At that time, Jim was only 26 years old. In 2018, Parsons turned 45. Hester did doing the math. By the end of a potential season 14 contract, he'd be 47 years old, only 5 years away from the age his father never reached. I'm not superstitious or anything like that, Parsons explained during his podcast appearance. It was just a context thing, context, that's what he called it. But what he really meant was mortality, the clock, the finish line nobody talks about, but everybody fears. His father never made it to 53. What if Parsons only had 6 more years? Did he want to spend those years, those precious, irreplaceable years in the same soundstage wearing the same superhero shirts? The question haunted him, and he desperately searched for answers. Looks like Sheldon doesn't know everything after all. Meanwhile, Todd kept pushing for them to start new creative projects together. They'd founded That's Wonderful Productions back in 2015, and it had already signed a major overall deal with Warner Brothers Television, but Jim was never available. He was always filming, always performing, always committed to something else. Todd wanted to create and actually use this production company he'd started. But Jim was stuck in a contract that made him shoot 8 episodes of The Big Bang Theory in Los Angeles in about 22 weeks of filming. He was also on Broadway doing 8 performances every single week in New York. Then, As if that wasn't intense enough, he signed on for the Netflix-limited series Hollywood, where He played Henry Wilson. That's another several weeks of intense shooting. Jim was flying coast to coast, constantly memorizing different scripts, inhabiting completely different characters, all while maintaining the precision timing required for both television and live theater. On top of that, he had a commercial contract with Intel that required him to work during what should have been his week off. He was exhausted. His body and mind screamed for rest. All his commitments together had completely drained him. Then he began to question if he would be able to give more years to the Big Bang Theory. He had an answer now. It was time to stop. In August 2018, Jim returned to Los Angeles after that nightmare summer in New York. He'd been carrying this decision around like a weight for weeks. He knew what he had to do. He went to Chuck Lorre's house on a Sunday. Chuck Lorre is the co-creator of The Big Bang Theory. Jim sat down and told Chuck he wasn't signing for seasons 13 and 14. Chuck understood immediately, and according to multiple sources, he was supportive, even compassionate about the decision. But he also pointed out the reality that both men already knew. The show could not continue without Sheldon Cooper. The entire premise, the title itself, The Big Bang Theory, referenced Sheldon's work in theoretical physics. No Sheldon, no show. Chuck didn't try to change Parsons' mind. He didn't throw more money at him. He just accepted it, and a few days later, Jim gathered the cast in his dressing room after a table read: Johnny Galecki, Kay Cuoco, Simon Helberg, Kunal Nair, Mayim Bialik, and Melissa Rauch. The people he'd worked with for over a decade, his television family. He told them the same thing he told Chuck. Everyone cried. Later, Johnny Galecki admitted to feeling blindsided. Not because of Jim's decision itself, but because Jim went to the creators first instead of talking to his castmates beforehand. They were like a family at that point. And Jim should have gone to them first. Maybe if he had, he would have known Johnny was tired, too. Johnny was already having doubts about performing well after so long, too. Even the people who initially felt hurt by the decision eventually realized Jim might have been the only one brave enough to say it out loud. CBS and Warner Brothers made the announcement on August 22, 2018 that season 12 would be the longest-running multi-camera sitcom in television history was ending. Theory aired, 18.5 million people watched it live. Millions more streamed it in the following days. It became one of the most watched scripted finales of the last decade. A fitting send-off for a show that had dominated television for 12 years. Jim was afraid he had made the wrong decision to leave, but he claimed never to have regretted it. Do you think he's being honest? Before Jim Parsons was the highest-paid actor on television, he was just a theater kid from Texas. Born March 24, 1973 in Houston, Jim grew up in the northern suburb of Spring. His mom was a teacher, his dad ran a plumbing supply company. He had a normal family and a normal childhood except for one thing. Jim knew from age 6 he wanted to be an actor. He performed in a school production of The Elephant's Child playing the Coca-Cola bird. And something clicked. He didn't just enjoy it. He knew with the kind of certainty most 6-year-olds never feel about anything that this was what he was supposed to do with his life. But after high school, fear began to creep in. So, he tried to give it all up. He enrolled at the University of Houston, but initially avoided theater, convinced it was too risky as a career choice. His decision seemed practical and responsible. It was the kind of decision that makes parents breathe easier at night. It lasted about 2 years. Jim realized one thing. He was miserable when he wasn't acting. So, he changed his major to theater and never looked back. During his time at University of Houston, Jim was prolific. He appeared in 17 plays across 3 years. He even co-founded Infernal Bridegroom Productions, a theater company that would stage dozens of productions before closing in 2007. He became a regular performer at the Stages Repertory Theater in Houston. The guy was obsessed. After graduating, Jim knew he needed more training. He applied to graduate schools, and landed a spot in a highly competitive 2-year program at the University of San Diego, taught in partnership with the Old Globe Theater. Only 7 students were accepted that year. The program director, Rick Sear, later admitted he had reservations about admitting Parsons. Jim is a very specific personality. He's thoroughly original, which is one reason he's been so successful. But we worried, does that adapt itself to classical theater? Turns out it did. Parsons completed his Master of Fine Arts degree in 2001 and immediately moved to New York City to chase his dreams. New York was not kin to Jim Parsons. He struggled badly. He auditioned for 15 to 30 television pilots by his own estimation. Sometimes he'd get cast and then the pilot wouldn't get picked up by any network, sometimes he'd make it to callbacks and then get rejected. Sometimes he wouldn't even get past the first round. He survived off-Broadway theater work and television commercials. In 2002, Helen did a small guest spot on the show. In 2004, he had a tiny role in the indie film Garden State. In 2004, he got a recurring role on Judging Amy. These weren't big breaks. These were survival gigs, barely paying the rent type situations. Then in 2006, he auditioned for a new CBS sitcom called The Big Bang Theory. Jim read the pilot script and immediately connected with something unusual. It wasn't the character himself. Jim has repeatedly said he didn't feel any personal relationship with Sheldon Cooper as a person. It was the dialogue. He went into the audition and delivered a performance so precise, so perfectly calibrated that creator Chuck Lorre insisted on a second audition. Lorre wanted to make sure Jim could replicate what he'd just done, that it wasn't a fluke. Jim came back and did it again. Same precision, rhythm, and weird magic that would eventually define Sheldon Cooper for 12 seasons. So, he got the part. When The Big Bang Theory premiered September 24, 2007, the reviews were mixed at first. Critics weren't sure what to make of the show about socially awkward physicists, but audiences loved it. By season 3, it was CBS's highest-rated show, pulling in over 12 million viewers per episode. And Jim was collecting awards like other people collect coffee mugs. He won the Primetime Emmy Award for Outstanding Lead Actor in a Comedy Series 4 times, 2010, 2011, 2013, and 2014. He won a Golden Globe in 2011. He was nominated for Emmys every single year from 2009 to 2014. His salary reflected his dominance. In 2010, he and co-stars Johnny Galecki and Kate Cuoco signed contracts guaranteeing them $200,000 per episode. By 2014, that number jumped to $1 million per episode, plus over 1% of the show's earnings. From 2015 to 2018, Forbes named Jim the world's highest-paid television actor. In 2017 alone, he earned $27.50 million, not bad for a theater kid from Houston who spent years scraping by in New York. Even while dominating television, he never stopped doing theater. In 2011, he made his Broadway debut in Larry Kramer's The Normal Heart, an AIDS crisis drama. For Jim, a homosexual man who'd been with his partner Todd Spivak since 2002. The project was deeply personal. In 2012, he played Lwood P. Dow in a revival of Harvey. In 2015, Hester as God in An Act of God. In 2018, the same year he decided to leave The Big Bang Theory. He performed in the 50th anniversary Broadway production of The Boys in the Band. That 2018 production won the Tony Award for Best Revival of a Play. The entire cast, including Parsons, reprised their roles in the 2020 film adaptation. Jim never chose between television and theater. Headed both somehow at the same time with equal commitment and excellence until his body and mind finally demanded the slow down. If had abandoned theater, do you think he would still be filming The Big Bang Theory now? Well, the Big Bang Theory universe didn't end when the show wrapped in 2019. First came Young Sheldon, the prequel series that ran for 7 seasons and concluded in 2024. Parsons served as narrator and executive producer, but didn't appear on screen until the series finale. Then came Georgie and Mandy's First Marriage, another spin-off that's currently airing in CBS. But the big question everyone's asking is about the newest spin-off, Stuart Fails to Save the Universe. This show is wild. It's currently in production at HBO Max, and it's the first Big Bang Theory spin-off that's not a prequel.